Streaming from outside the mainstream, Beyond a Pale, the podcast, hosted by Paleface.
Today's guest is truly inspiring. He is an influencer, self-help author, motivational speaker, publicist, and host of the acclaimed What's Your Excuse podcast. To many, he is also affectionately known as the blind blogger. Maxwell Ivey, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, man. That is great. I appreciate you having me on, and I love the intro. Critically acclaimed host of What's Your Excuse? I'm going to have to steal that.
Yeah, you have to. Hey, Max, can I call you Max? Because in your first book, you write that your friends can call you Max. So I want to call you Max. Okay.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that you've read the book, and absolutely.
It's a good book. In fact, tell me how you went from being, in your words, a failed carny to become an accomplished entrepreneur and influencer.
Basically by taking the suggestions of people who I trusted. It started when my family's carnival went out of business after my dad's death. And at that time, I felt like the only thing I really knew anything about was helping people sell their rides, because I'd had to do it for my family. Little did I know that, being online as a business owner was a whole lot more than just calling people on the phone and trying to make deals. It was, having to have a website and a blog and doing email, social media, and a whole bunch of other things. But I started the website because I knew I needed to do something. I felt like that was all I really knew how to do. And as I did it, I learned something. After we filed for the domain name, I went through the W3C school online and learned how to create my own website. It was visually hideous, but it was effective because it got the amusement equipment in front of people where they could see it. And so as I got better, the website got better, but I got it to the point where, okay, this is as good as I can get it right now. And if people want to, criticize how it looks, fine. And I just focused on helping people, getting as much attention on the equipment I had for sale as possible, focusing on what I could do something about, which was promoting it as opposed to trying to make the site look pretty. And I built an email list. I did the social media as it came along. I sent a lot of emails. I made a lot of phone calls. And as I did more and more stuff for the website, people said, Max, you're really inspiring. We appreciate how you show up and take on difficult challenges with joy. And you just seem to find a way to get to the next step. And I was like, okay. So I started a second website called The Blind Blogger, which people had been calling me the Blind Blogger online for a couple of years, because I was the only blind person they knew, and I was a blogger. So I became the Blind Blogger. I was actually challenged to write my first book on a dare because a woman wanted me to be part of an online summit, and she said I had to have a book or something that I could give away or sell on the cheap. And so I started writing the book, and about a month later, she got a hold of me and said, there are 4 women on this summit, and they think that it would market better if it was all women, so you're out. And I'm like, well, I know what it is to promote stuff. I understand the importance of putting feet on the ground and faces behind the screen. So I kept writing my book. I published it with the help of a lady I met online, Lorraine Regularly, in January of 2014. That book led to 2 more books so far, and a 4th one is going to be out this month or next month. I had been doing podcast interviews. I did my first radio interview in 2013 because it was the only way I could find where I could connect with people without leaving my house. And as a blind man in a suburb in a western city where you don't have any transit options, that was my solution. I've been doing podcasts for 7 years now. I've done over 200 shows. I've helped over a dozen other people get booked on podcasts so they can share their stories. So a lot of it is necessity, doing things because I didn't think I had a choice. I didn't think there was a better option, or I didn't realize how much I was capable of at the time. And then having friends who would either suggest things or challenge me to do things. I like to say that one of the best things can happen to you is for somebody you trust to double dog dare you to do something. So from the podcast, people kept asking me, when are you going to do your own podcast? And I kept saying, when I find somebody to handle the tech stuff, so all I have to do is show up and have a conversation. And, a guy named Frederick Bai from Canada shows up, and we do my show together for a year. And then finally he convinces me that I don't need his help anymore. And so I've been doing the show by myself for 3 years now, I think, interviewing people on the podcast and, doing the Zoom interviews. I've been telling people lately that a lot of us blind people were social distancing before we knew what it was.
Before it was in fashion, right?
Yeah, this was our thing because remote meant you didn't have to figure out taxis or Ubers or family members. You didn't have to get dressed up to leave the house. And depending on where you live, even if you have transit, you might be looking at, at spending half a day to go and meet somebody for an hour and then spend the other half of the day getting home again. So it's really been the way a lot of us blind people and other people with disabilities have been doing things for a long time now. And it wasn't what I wanted to do. I would have rather been traveling around, meet people in person, but it got me in front of people. It let me build my brand. It let me become the blind blogger and the What's Your Excuse guy. So I would say when you feel like there isn't a choice or like you've only got one option,
mm-hmm.
well, embrace the options.
Right.
Is there some way you can make that into something you can be proud of, that you can enjoy doing until you get better, become more skilled, or find that next opportunity? I'm known for singing the river on my podcast. And the reason for that, I'll ask you in a little bit what you think of it. But the reason for that is because it really is my life. I went from being a carnival owner to an equipment broker. Along the way, I wrote a book, then I've written 3 more. I've done podcast interviews, but I've done public speaking, and I like to sing and travel, and I do things and share my experiences. And I'm not afraid to make myself look bad. If something happened and I look silly or foolish, I will share that as long as I can teach the rest of them a lesson out there. Like, don't be afraid to take the risk because even the bad experiences have value or something along those lines. But,
yeah, it's good to have that vulnerability. So,
yeah.
So I want to say congratulations for being able to actually reference A Christmas Story on my podcast because I love that movie. So I'm going to triple dog dare you to actually answer this next question. So I was hoping we could talk about your book, Leading You Out of the Darkness into the Light, A Blind Man's Inspirational Guide to Success. I've been reading it and I thought immediately I've got to get this guy on my show. So what led you to tell your story and share it with others?
Well, like I said, I was challenged to do it. And I think it's one of those things, they say everybody has a book in them. In high school and college, I was a pretty fair writer. I enjoyed doing it, even when they would give the paper back to you and, and there were more red on it than black. But once I started writing, I really enjoyed the experience. And then after I did it, seeing the way people have responded to the book, not only the people who have read it, but just the people who followed the progress from when I started writing it to when I got close to publishing to when it was finally out there in the world. So it's it was published in January. So I started writing it in August. I finished it in October or November.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it took a long time, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Partly because I never thought the book was really good enough or long enough. I thought that it needed to have more to it. But, after showing it to several people online, I was finally convinced that, when you tell a story, the length of the book doesn't really matter. It's when you're through telling the story, the book's over. But I never really expected that I would write a book. I was actually hoping in the beginning that I would sell enough carnival rides that would be what I do from now on.
Right.
But, once I started writing it, I couldn't stop writing it. And seeing how much it has helped other people out there as a result of writing this book is why I keep writing.
Right. I don't think voluminous is necessarily equates with quality. That's why I prefer to read Nathaniel Hawthorne's short stories rather than his novels. I find them a little voluminous, but anyway, so I digress. But
actually, I agree with you. I think one of the worst things that ever happened to the publishing industry was when the paper got really cheap in the late 80s to mid 90s. Yeah. And the editors basically took the restraints off of a lot of authors. And if I ever see Stephen King in person, I'm going to ask him for my 14 hours back that I spent reading Dreamcatcher. That's the one that only to find out the ending was basically the ending to War of the Worlds. You know, I mean.
Yeah, that's something. So in your book, you have exercises that you lay out. So what do you think is powerful about that to help others realize their success, having those exercises?
Well, part of it is they're exercises that I've actually used in my own life, and they've worked for me, and people can see where I'm at now as far as the progress I've made from before I wrote the book to now. But I think the most important part of the exercises is not the exercises themselves. It's the fact that if somebody gets that book, I've done everything I can do to encourage them to reach out to me as they're working through the exercises, because I want them to know that there's at least one person out there that's listening that doesn't judge them, that isn't expecting them to fail because they've never done it before, or that isn't going to be mad at them because they're not the same person that they've known for 20 or 30 or 40 years. You know, when people start to make changes in their lives, a lot of times the people around them do not embrace the changes. And it's really difficult when you don't have a positive voice to say, yeah, go ahead and do it. Yeah, you're on the right track. You know, you started off good, but you really need to actually start doing some of the things that you've been talking about doing. So the exercises, I think the most important part is letting people know that they have some support. And other authors that I knew at the time told me not to do that. They said, you know, people will take advantage of it. They'll basically treat you as a free coach if they can send you emails. But I know this. I know a lot of people, and I'm sure you know a lot of people. They've read the book. They've listened to the audio tapes. They've gone to the seminar. But when they get home, they're still the same person. They've made absolutely no progress. And I didn't want that to be my book. So, you know, any of my books, they have my websites, they have my contact forms, they have my email addresses. Yet I'm saddened by the fact that more people don't reach out, because one, for an author or a podcaster, and you know this, often a kind word can be more important to you than a check.
Oh, yes.
And, you know, just to know that somebody's listening, that they've been listening to your podcast, and they've been paying attention to you, and they enjoy what you're doing. So the fact that I gave them the opportunity to let me know if they're liking my book or if they're hating my book, you know. The other thing is by doing that, I've invited them to begin a relationship with me online. And we never know where those will take us.
Right.
You know, one of the things I'm disappointed in by other people who do podcast interviews is so many people think you show up, you have a conversation, you leave, that you post it on Facebook, that's it. But what they're missing is you just spend an hour talking with somebody, you've gotten to know them. You should at least be on the way to being friends with them, and you should want to help them, and in the future, maybe they'll help you. You know, it's a beginning. So that's another thing I was hoping with the exercises and the email address, is that people who read the book wouldn't just buy the book, that they would become part of my story, and maybe I'd become part of theirs.
No, that's great. I love the fact that you are willing to do that, that you're willing to pay it forward, that you're willing to make those connections with people. That's so admirable. And I think a lot of people, their own peril, when they don't do that, they are missing out. And you seem to have figured it out, that human connections are the best, and just being able to share what you learn, and then learn from other people too. And you teach to learn. So I'm so excited that you've taken that approach. It's really inspiring to me.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I've had this other question on my mind, because why do you call your podcast "What's Your Excuse"?
Well, I tried not to call it that. I really wanted to call it something else. The problem is that nobody that has been listening to my interviews before I gave it that name wanted me to call it anything but What's Your Excuse. And in life, when somebody gives you a brand name and it's a good brand name, the smart person just says, thank you, I really appreciate it, and they run with it. And that's what I've done. I've become Mr. Midway for my amusement equipment. I've become the blind blogger for my writing and online work. And the podcast is What's Your Excuse? And that goes back to the fact that a lot of people still don't have contacts online with blind people that are doing the things I'm doing.
Right.
So they see me with a blog and a podcast, and their response is, well, if Max can do it, then what's my excuse? And I've even seen people start their own blogs or begin their own podcasts because basically they're like, man, I feel ashamed. He's doing it and I'm not. So
this blind guy's doing it. Why can't I, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, I also want people to know that I have the same feelings because, before I started writing, before the podcast, I didn't really want to share my story because I've read the stories of people like Eric Wehamir, the blind climber that's done all 7 summits, including Everest, or Rachel Skadoris, who's hasn't won the Iditarod, but she's finished it 2 or 3 times. It's a blind musher, or Tom Sullivan, who's like the king because he once had a regular segment on Good Morning America, and he's traveled the world as a musician and entertainer. So those are some of the people that I grew up, knowing about. And so I used to think, nobody wants to hear my story because they got their stories.
Right.
But eventually, somebody explained it to me that there are so many people who don't have anything really standing in their way. They don't have a built-in excuse like I do, and they're not doing anything with their lives. They're basically sleepwalking through their days. They're satisfied. They're comfortable with things because they're more worried about the possibility that something could become worse by trying to stretch themselves than thinking it could become better. And the fact that I have a built-in excuse and don't use it is what makes my story powerful. And it took me 2 years of arguing with really close friends who I had always said yes to before I finally said, okay, you're right. And in fact, the first post on the blindblogger.net is titled, I think I'm ready to be an inspiration. And that came from truth because that was how I felt. I felt like I had fought it for 2 years, and now it's like, okay, I understand it. I accept it. I have days where I still don't think that I'm that guy, but I go ahead and do the work and share what's going on, and people are encouraged by my honesty, by my wide-eyed wonder as I approach the world. How I can find treasures in ordinary experiences and the positive in things other people would go, their whole day is ruined, So the fact that all I really do is I show up, work my butt off every day, and face whatever the next challenge is in front of me. And thankfully, that's inspirational.
That's awesome. So, Max, this has been great talking to you. I just want to let you lead the audience with one more thing if you want to.
Okay. Here's the most important thing I can teach them. We try, for some reason, people think that it's weak, that they'll be embarrassed or less if they ask for help or if they ask for opportunities. And I grew up knowing I was going to lose my vision, being told never be afraid to ask. So I've got a superpower, if you will, that most people don't, because I'm not afraid to ask for help or for opportunities. So here's what I want them to remember. When you refuse to ask, you rob the other person of the joy they would have received from helping you. I just want to say that one more time because it's the most important thing I can say. When you refuse to ask, you rob the other person of their joy. And
that's good advice.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that if I can get people to focus on the other person, to take it off themselves, to get out of ego, and think about the fact that you're actually ruining somebody's day by not asking them, that maybe we'll get some people to focus on interdependence instead of independence, and they'll make the kind of progress I've made because, we've talked about all the stuff I've done. I wouldn't be here, or at least I wouldn't be as far here as I am without the help of a lot of people, both online and in person, many of whom, people from all over the world that I've met through the internet who have volunteered to help me, who've encouraged me, who've inspired me themselves. So that's why that's the most important thing I can share with people.
Well, that's awesome. I love that. And I think you're right. I think people love to actually answer questions. I think they love to be consulted. I think they do. And that's great advice. I will urge all of you out there in the audience to connect with Max at his website, theblindblogger.net, or check out one of his books available on Amazon. Max, is there anything that I missed?
No, you got it all. And if the only thing I can think of is if they want to start sharing their stories on podcasts and radio shows, like I just did with you, and have the honor, the pleasure to share their story and the energy that comes from having great conversations with amazing people, just hit that blindblogger.net and reach out to me, because the coaching and the publicity for authors and other creatives is one of the favorite things that I get to do.
Well, that's great. Maybe I can be on your show sometime.
Yeah.
I would love it.
I'll look forward to it.
Okay.
And I love it when people turn my own words around on me, because I know if you've read the book, you've read the part about if you don't ask, they can't say yes.
I know. And that's why. So, hey, Max Ivey, the Blind Blogger, it has been my pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Godspeed.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And you too, brother.
You've been listening to Beyond a Pale, the podcast.